Hello, everyone.
Hi, Lama.
Hey, hello, Julie. So long, so long.
Yes, Lamala. So long, so long. We haven't seen you for so long.
These things happen. Hey, Ken. Hey, everyone. How are you doing?
Hi.
And I've been. Thank you for coming to this talk. This talk is going to be one of these talks by which everyone already hates me, but I thought it was going to be. I already got like banned from 10 Buddhist forums and they write me, write about Buddhism or not. I'm like, dude, we need to talk. We need to talk at some point. Hey, Eric. Hello. So welcome to this talk. Welcome to this talk that's about Buddhism politics. This is going to be like more of a general talk, right? That a practice or a sutra or anything else. So please feel free, interrupt at any time, comment, whatever you want. It is as interactive as possible, right? So we can talk and share opinions and see what everyone thinks. I know this is going to be probably a very let's say it, very polemical polemical religion, but I think we'll be able to work it out. So let me tell you, everyone, how this came to be. This is not the first time. You know that I've been talking about Buddhism politics. If you go to like Buddhist store, there's like 20 articles by myself in my more, let's say, academic scholastic career, explaining relationships and everything else. But all of this comes from something, from a moment in my career as Buddhist. So, as you know, I live in Argentina. There's no many native Buddhists here, right? And less Guarani Buddhists, less Indian Buddhists, so to speak, right? So I, as most of you, was a convert to Buddhism. And I started Buddhism in Zen Buddhism, in the Soto Zen style, because I wanted to practice something different. What I was doing at that moment didn't really make that. There was a lot of gaps in the systems that I was practicing because of the conquest, and the colonization. So I say, someone told me, Buddhist is going to
It's like
sound
six.
good. Hey, and so I started doing Buddhism. I started practicing Buddhism. But was this problem, like from a very early age, which was that I've been always been kind of very stupid, and I need things to be explained to me time and time again, and with some degree of systematization, right? So when it started Zen, there were like a lot of things that how people also how Zen people are, which is a wonderful system and I love it. It was just not a good match for me. They were like, in Zen, there are no rituals. And I'm like, okay. And they were like, first thing you do when you enter the dojo, you bow. And then you sound the gong 3 times. And then you bow to the teacher. And I was like, but that's a ritual. No, that is not a ritual. And I'm like, yes, that is a ritual. And they were like, no. And I was like, okay, is there like a written thing and something I can read? And they're like, no. Okay. And then they were like, now we're going to study Shobogenso from Dogen. I was like, that is a book. Yes. It's a philosophy book. Can I read it? Yes. But you told me no. Yes, but it's confusing. So I started reading and it was a lot of confusion. I was like, okay, I need to do something with this because I'm not making any head or sense of tales of anything. And especially Dogen is a very good writer, right? It's extremely, for me, it's one of the best Buddhist philosophers ever. His take on time is wonderful, but it's difficult if you don't have any faintest idea, right? As your first contact, and he's as fighting by Viveka, by Tekana, you're like, what? What? He's doing what to whom? It's very confusing. So I said I need to have to do this in a more structured way, and I started uh, the career as a Buddhologist. Right, I started studying as a Buddhologist. I went to university, got my BA, then got my MA and my PhD, and so on and so on. The problem was that when I went back to different practitioners, right, of different kinds of Buddhism, Zen, Tibetan, whoever it was in Argentina, and you ask them something that has to do with politics, they would go like, no. I mean, you could be talking about whatever else you want to talk. You could be talking about, I don't know, killing kids and eating the innards. And they would like, so, well, if you're at high enough level, when you're free of all karma, you could be like, hey, can I go to your house? I don't know, kill your daughter and rape her corpse? And they would go like, if you do it non-dually, there wouldn't be any bad karma. But you go like, hey, but isn't this like a political statement? And they were like, no, 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 no. No, no, we cannot talk about this. No, 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 no. Nothing to do with Dharma. The problem was that while I was learning Buddhism and, Nepal, in India, in the US, in Europe, in Argentina, everywhere I went to learn Buddhism in a practical manner, they had kind of this no, 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 no attitude. What I was at the same time a student in my career, right? And I was studying, for example, courses like Buddhism, this history of Buddhism, Buddhism and how it expanded across the Asian countries, Buddhism in contemporary times, and all of these studies were very much about Buddhism as a social and political phenomenon. So while I understand some of the reluctance of people to talk about it, there is like fields of study of Buddhism and politics. It's not like I made it up. It's not like I came and say, hey, I'm going to, going to become like the first guy to talk about this. There's a field of fields, especially by Buddhists themselves, right? And this reaction of this idea of purity I always found fascinating. So today, what I want to do is give you my thesis on this, which is that not only Buddhism and politics is a thing, and they are joined at the hip, so to speak, but that if we are Buddhist and we believe that politics is the one thing it should never mix with, we're not really Buddhists. We're actually other thing. We think that this is like the one Satan of the world, right? We don't have any problem with cannibals, with serial killers like Angulimala joining. We don't have a problem with serial killers, with cannibalism, with destruction of, but we do have a problem with politics. That's our own thing. That's a problem for us. That's a problem for us. So I'm going to try to do this. And to do that, I'm going to try, like any talks which you talk about known A and known B, I'm going to try to define both. Yes, Lama Fede.
Lama, I just wanted to confirm if we actually do not, in fact, have a problem with cannibals.
No, we don't have a problem with cannibals. When do we have a problem with cannibals? Like half the tantric offerings are like cannibalism.
I just wanna confirm and make sure. Thank you, Lama.
Absolutely no
It
problem.
depends on their level of realization. If they are doing it non-dually, then everything is okay.
It is okay. But here's the problem. Here's what always struck me. Like I put a picture of, if I put a picture of like a yakshini or a daikini, which are literally flesh eaters, like the herukas. The herukas literally means blood drinkers, right? when you see any heruka, it's a blood drinker. So I put a picture of Vajrakilaya, everyone would go like this like horrible being with fires in his hands, and also like with knives and razor wings, everyone would go like, that is true Dharma. Now, if I put a picture of a politician meditating, everyone goes like, no, no. Dude, the best thing that could happen to us is that if every single politician would have bodhicitta in their heart. That's the best thing ever, right? But somehow it is impossible. So we accept cannibals more than we accept politicians. Politicians, cannibals, I don't know. Maybe interesting. Maybe something we need to become to. Right? So let me show you what I want to let me do this very old school kind of approach this. Come on, you can share Zoom. So let's do this. You're also in my screen, right? Excellent. So what we'll do is we'll put Buddhism plus politics, right? I'm going to do something extremely square, which is I'm going to try to define both. Let's do the most basic thing ever. So from Buddhism, essentially what I'm going to call Buddhism is going to be what is known as Buddha Dharma, which is the teaching that is contained into the sutras, plus agamas, plus vinayas, plus tantras, right? So what I'm saying here is, what is Buddhism for me? It is all the teachings of this person who's called Buddha Shakyamuni, right? Sorry, I'm going to mute you, Miguel. I think there's a little bit of background noise. Or mute yourself if you want to speak at any time. Don't worry. So everything that the Buddha taught, be it in Sutra, Tantra, Vinaya, Agama, whatever it is, I'm going to put it here. And I want to say that essentially this has several kind of three major like subdivisions, which is Nikaya, Mahayana, and Vajra. Yeah, right? So far, so good. Are we agreeing with this? Yeah, right? It's very simple. Now, politics. Politics, a little bit trickier to define, right? So, if we go, for example, to the Oxford Dictionary, right? The Oxford English Dictionary, we'll see the using of power in public life. Now, this is something wait a second, somebody kind of pepper it here. So this is such a kind of dry definition that I don't really want. I mean, yes, it is correct, right? But then we have to define power, then we have to define public life. It's a very academic kind of definition. So let's try to find another. If you go to the Merriam-Webster, it says it's the art of governance. Again, something that for me does not say anything, right? It's the art of governance. Okay, what do you mean? Then we have to re-ask the question, right? So let's set up a little bit more. So the classical things, for example, Aristotle, right? Aristotle has a book called Politics, right? And in his Politics, what he says is basically whatever one does in a polis, whatever one does in a community. Whatever one does in a community. Which is where there's a lot of discourse about everything that we do is political. That also could be applied here, right? If we go, for example, to Machiavelli, right? You know, Niccolo Machiavelli from the Prince, he would say it's the protection and ruling of the state. This is a very statist, kind of definition, and not that much, right? If you go, for example, to Hobbes, right? You know Hobbes, Leviathan Hobbes. It says it's to prevent chaos. This is a very classical. For example, Augustus Hobbes quotes Augustus when he says the alternative to me as an emperor is chaos, right? So essentially, it's the imposition of order, right? It's very anarchist. Exactly. Yes, for example, let's take the Republic that Rose is posting, right? What is the idea of the Republic? The idea of Republic is the idea of the philosopher king, right? This is an idea that's very close to a lot of Vajrayana thinking. that the king should be a Mahasiddha. That's why Suchandra, for example, king of Shambhala, is also Mahasiddha. That reveals a lot of the Kalachakra literature. This is very close. But we're still not going there. We're still trying to define politics. So I'm going to give you, for me, the most concrete definition, which I love, right? If you like to use another, we'll use another, right? For me, which is the from Laswell. I don't know if you know Laswell. Harold Laswell, a great political scientist. I mean, political science by itself is an American thing. They're your guys the absolute masters of it if you live in America. So it's a great read. And he says it is, for me, it's the best definition. Who gets what, when, and how. This is wonderful for me. Politics is essentially it's that which deals with who gets what, when, and how. This is a wonderful definition. It's very concrete, and it can help us. Bear in mind that in anything that I say this, every of these kind of definitions, I never talked about parties, for example, right? I never say it's the political parties who will. There is no mention of Democrat, Republican, libertarian, anarchist. I'm just doing very broad definitions, right? But I like this definition. I like this definition. So if you don't mind, guys, I'm going to take this definition. Sorry. This definition that's here, and I'm going to use this one, right? So, okay, let's say that politics is the art, or what politics is what happens when someone decides who gets what, when, and where, when and how. If that's the case, the first thing we have to understand is that if we define Buddhism as the teachings that contain in sutras, agamas, vinayas, and tantras, we already have something that says that is very linkable, which is the vinayas. No, vinayas are texts which essentially deal how the community should work, especially the community of monks and nuns. It deals with, for example, what a monk should eat, what a monk should get, how he should get it, how one should become a monk or not, what are the rules that one has to do. So if we do this, just by the existence of the Vinaya, we should say that Buddhism has a political dimension. Also, it's very much compatible with Aristotle, right? We're talking about a community. And also, you could say it's very compatible with Hobbes, right? Because what you're doing by establishing a rule book for a community of monks and nuns is to prevent chaos. So in that sense, we could argue that if we take this definition of politics, Buddhism not only it's compatible with thinking politically, but it should, because to be honest, if you need to be in a traditional Buddhist community, you should follow the rules. As long as there are rules, there is policy, right? Does that make sense, guys? Or I'm kind of, or this is too bizarre, or too kind of far-reaching? Excellent. So in that sense, the first thing we have to understand that this has rules within the community, but also in the sutras, there are rules about how one should regard themselves vis-a-vis the larger community, right? So, for example, there's a lot of sutras that talk about who is the true Brahmin, even in the Nikaya. I'm not talking about within Tantra system, just in the Nikaya, right? Nikaya Mahayana. So you probably have read about this a lot already, but what would you say is a true Brahmin for the Buddha? If you have to kind of tell me, right? Who is the true Brahmin for the Buddha? Brahmin in the sense of the highest caste, right?
Lama, is it somebody who is an acharya who keeps the practice every day before dawn and keeps the tenets?
Yes, that is the way. Let me read the quote right from the suttas. It says, "A true Brahmin is one who has acquired Brahminhood not by birth, not by caste, not by varna, nor by inheritance, but through his noble actions." Right? And for example, if you have to think about this, what did it say? It says that someone from any caste can become a Brahmin, right? And yet, this,
Mama, that's too crazy.
especially, it's crazy now. And imagine 2,500 years ago, right? So a true Brahmin is someone who acts nobly. But the problem is when he's talking about this, he's not talking about this in a bake, right? He's talking about this in India. In India, 2,400, 2,500 years back. So this is one of the major issues that happen that happens to conflict with the general population of India. And for example, in the Dhammapada, right, in chapter 26, I think it's chapter 26, he says, Na jatani nagotena jam hot brahmano yamas sakanya damo shiso brahmana veda. One is a Brahmin not by hair, not by inheritance, but one who knows the true Vedas, right? And the true Vedas in the sense of truth. So in that sense, what he's saying is, hey, Brahmins, all you Vedic Brahmins that are there, like reading your Vedas, doing sacrifice, that is not correct. But not, to not use another term like bullshit, right? That is not correct. The only way to truly become a Brahmin, it's to be of noble action and noble thought, to really become enlightened. And this, of course, it's very hard to hear for people who believe in caste, right? So by doing this, you not only generate a who gets what, anyone can get to be a Brahmin, but essentially you attack a little bit of the community. You provide another model of the community, right? And there's, I know, of course, we're all here, but whenever this is streamed, whenever this is put in YouTube, there will be someone, I can feel them. This is my city. This is the true city of the Guru. I can feel people typing up, right? Saying, oh, but this was in the time of the Buddha. This does not apply now. Like the Buddha is talking about this, but that was the Buddha. No, Buddhists should not be political. And yet, what is the major argument? If we do not think about the Buddhas and the sutras and the tantras and everything else, the major argument for Buddhism to be that's exactly my Jedi mind trick. It's called interdependence. This is the major, most important argument for Buddhism to have a political dimension. If Buddhism teaches interdependence, which it teaches, there's absolutely no way for us to say that Buddhism does not teach interdependence, right? The main problem is that it's interdependent with the context it is situated. That is why, for example, you have people at the time of the Buddha talking about Brahmins, but also talking about permissible ages of marriage, which at the time of the Buddha were 8 years old. Now, 500 years later, Vasubandhu and Asanga find this, and at that time, permissible age to marriage was 13 years old, right? Of course, for us, these are both pedophiles, right? In modern times, we would say this is terrible. But this was the law at the time. So Vasubandhu and Ashanga I asked this by a student. Hey, I'm reading the sutras, and the sutras say that someone can marry when they have 80. Someone is of age when they have 8 years old. But this is terrible now. And the answer is, well, there is not a single word of Buddhism which is not interdependent, right? With other things. Remember that also interdependence means that it's empty, right? So it is interdependent. It means that it has to talk in the language and with the uses and customs of the time. That is why the Buddha does not talk like a hipster, right? He's not trying to and worried about where to get a mocha latte or to style his perfect. If the Buddha had a mustache, it would be perfect. I'm sure it would be wonderful, oiled, but he's not worried about that. He's worried about the things that impede enlightenment in his time, which are caste, for example, right? And not only Vasubandhu and Asanga took this position, but actually people like, and I bet most of Buddhists in the West don't know him, but it's incredible. Here, Ambedkar has a wonderful text which is called The Buddha and His Teachings, and another called Annihilation of Caste, which should be required reading for Buddhists. Ambedkar's arguments. Ambedkar was Birmanendrao Ambedkar, probably the most important figure in the passage of India from part of the British Empire to a self-sustaining country. And yet, he is probably the most unknown, which you're going to find that it's not a coincidence. Ambedkar was a world-renowned economist who was the principal writer of the Indian Constitution as it is today, right? And yet, whom do we think as a national figure of that time? Usually, when people are talking about India in the 1940s and the 1950s,
Rajendra Prasad.
or Gandhi, right?
Yes, Lama.
Well, aka Gandhi or famous Mahatma, right? It's probably one of the most well known. Why is Ambedkar not so much known? Because Ambedkar, it was from the lowest caste. Yes, Gandhi was that long ago. 1948, I think, right? And Ambedkar was from the lowest caste, and also because he became a Buddhist, and he created what is called the Navayana, which most people don't ever include in the list of Buddhist styles. But what does Ambedkar and the Navayana people do? They focus on this level, which I think explains why he's not well known in Buddhism and Buddhism in West, which is the impact that the Buddha's teaching have on the people that practice them in a context of traditional Hinduism. They say the Buddha's teaching is, first of all, political. It's not that it's even compatible. It is a political philosophy, which uses concepts and meditation to prompt up and to help adopt the political belief. And from their point of view, I think there's a very well thought argument. Because if you think, you probably live in somewhere which there are not so many castes about, right? And in which Buddhism is well regarded. I would say that in most places in the world, say from those places where Buddhism originated, Buddhism is well regarded today. If I go to, I don't know, Costa Rica, and I say people, oh, I'm a Buddhist, people will say, oh, how nice. If I go to Munich in Germany and say, well, I'm a Buddhist, people usually will say, oh, how nice. Which is a different thing if I go like I'm saying, hey, I'm a voodoo priest, right? Or I'm a Babalorixá of Umbanda. Here in Argentina, the same. They're very tied to social status. And yet, if you live somewhere where there are castes, and you believe that these castes are not real, just a way for people to enslave you, how is that not political? Right? That's the question I always wanted to ask. What negative reaction did you find, Raul? Usually, maybe that the US is becoming a little bit more like conservative, but when I was there, it was I usually got good reactions. But of course, it can happen, right? So we have this. Oh, well, that yes, I guess that there are cases, especially people who are very closed off, probably that unless you're like from their own temple, um, it's never going to be, it's never going to be all right. You have to be like from the same temple as them, right? So, folks ask a very good question. Is the class system somewhat analogous to the caste system? It Yes and no, right? Yes and no, because usually class system it's more of a Western. It's especially an English way of organizing, in which it's tied up more towards ownership of certain means. But one interesting thing is that there is a lot of studies, longitudinal studies in the UK, in which the class system is heavily skewed to those who came from Normandy with William the Conqueror in the 11th century. And if you go, there is a lot of studies about this, about the Oxbridge attendance. Oxbridge is Oxford and Cambridge. There is a lot of studies that show that the same last names constantly appear in the registry. There's an overabundance of Nevilles, for example, right? And in that sense, it becomes a caste system. It becomes a caste system. So there's some overlap, though it's not necessarily the same. I met a lot of Brahmins who are very poor, for example. Whereas in the class system, if you're very poor constantly, you kind of lose the class. Yes, Lamajit.
People demonize Brahmins too much, Lama. A general Brahmin wakes up at
Yeah.
4 o'clock, does his prayers, and continues praying, keeps his fasts, remains a vegetarian, prays for his community, and then dies. And rinse and repeat. People get it twisted that Brahmins are some kind of evil being. Their job is to be a priest, and they just stay praying. Society is set up cruelly. That's nobody's fault.
Well, here's like we were saying before, right? With nobody's fault. It is the fault of some people. It is the fault of some people.
Yes,
It
it's
may not
somebody's
be.
fault, but if you're born as a Brahmin,
Oh,
all you
do
can
not
do
have.
is act justly to everybody. You cannot dismantle the system one person.
Yes, but you could be one of the things that Becker would say is that yes, you cannot dismantle the system by yourself, but you can find people. There are people who also want to dismantle the system, right? So therefore, your duty as an Arya would be to join those people to help change this circumstance. Because one thing that the Buddhas always emphasize is the possibility that the world can be different, that there is an end of samsara. Because if there weren't an end of samsara, there would be no Buddhism, right? And I just want to say, I understand that this is the beginning of the times where most of this anti-Brahmanical discourse happens in the time of the Buddhas, right? Now, Brahmins are usually, as you say, they're not as well off as time of the Buddha. But in the time of the Buddhas, it was a little bit different. They were a lot less Brahmins, for one thing, and they were just tied to a couple of particular powerful clans at that moment, especially in the kingdom of Magadha, right, where the Buddha was located. So they have the monopoly of a lot of things in that sense. The problem is, of course, that even though they weren't responsible for setting up the system, you need to be able to change it. And this allows me to seg into the other thing that also straddles, which is the thing of pure lens. Right? Right, Brahmin weren't allowed to it, but we know that they did, just as we know that monks did. If we're talking about who gets what, when, and how, for example, the Vinaya says that monks should never handle money, right? Especially the Nikaya monks should never handle money. And yet, how does monastery work? Well, either they handled money, even though they weren't supposed to, or they had kind of a lower class of monk helpers, that is monk novices, who did the money, though because it was a position with a lot of prestige. You will find in literature from the time of the Nikaya Mahayana split that there was a lot of critical literature about the monk helpers who basically had so much power and money that they basically ran the monastery, right? There was monk there, the abbot somewhere like reading and teaching philosophy, and then all the monk helpers would basically run. This is called, for example, this in Tibetan Buddhism is called a labrang, which is like the household for the really big name Rinpoches. And a very common thing that happens in almost all Rinpoche families is that, and we're going to go there in just a second, is that the labrang essentially manages lineage. And the Rinpoche kind of lives in it. As I remember one Rinpoche once told me, you know who are people that are legends in their own lifetime? I was like, yes. Says, I am lifetime in my own legend. And it's very much like that. So, going back a little bit on track and to answer folks, Pure Lands. What are Pure Lands, right? So Pure Lands, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept, but Pure Lands are essentially Buddha fields. These are also what they call Buddha kshetras, right? And Buddha fields of a particular sort. So there are Buddha fields that allow you, if you haven't quite been able to become a Buddha, to practice in that place without any kind of distraction. So if you die, let's say the most famous, Sukhavati, right? The Pure Land of Buddha Amitabha. If you die, you go to that place. And then, because you have no distractions, you will become a Buddha. Right? If you gather enough merit in this life with all the distractions and all the problems to go to Sukhavati, in Sukhavati you will become a Buddha. Because the only thing you can do is practice. Right? So in a way, to go to a Pure Land is basically becoming a Buddha. The only thing is that you're going to become a Buddha just a couple of years later. It's a very attractive concept because it allows you to not necessarily give up on hope, even if you are old or infirm, or if you have problems, because you always can go to a Pure Land when you have a new body to keep working. But all Pure Lands are not the same. Yes, the most famous, Sukhavati. If you read the Sutras of Sukhavati, you will find that in Sukhavati, for example, there's no biological sex. And everyone is monk-like in determination. And everyone gets 2 meals per day. And everyone gets 1 robe, 1 bowl, 1 meditation seat, usually in the form of a lotus. And everyone gets a couple of birds who sing the sutras to them, and a tree under to recline. And here's the thing. Let me ask you. If I'm talking about a place when there is a Buddha called Amitabha, who tells everyone, you will get this in this manner and at this point, aren't we going into again into Laswell's definition of politics? We said politics is
Lama, he's called Lord Amitabha.
Lord Amitabha, yes, also.
But I mean, like, it's a political reality. He's the Lord of that land.
He's the Lord of the land. He's who decide who gets what, when, and how. It's like Amitabha in Sukhavati is 1 man, 1 vote. He's the man, he gets the vote. That's That's the reality. Osama Jili says he's Lord of Lebanon. And how is that not a political situation? And of course, you can say, but that's a policy that leads to enlightenment. Yes, yes, that comes from the idea of what is called the Chakravartin. I'm writing all of this in the Buddhist section because these are all Buddhist ideas, though this one would also be here. Literally means ruler of the wheel. What it really means is is like a cosmic or world king, right? The high king. And the idea of Chakravartin is present into the first Buddhist thought. Even when you're talking about the Buddha is thought as the universal monarch, the Chakravarti. And he is good, therefore he should rule. And in that sense, it's very much like Raul was saying before, with Plato, right? The idea of the Chakravartin is the idea of Plato of the philosopher king. And a lot of thought in Buddhism surrounds this idea that a government should be handled by those best equipped. What Plato calls the guardians, right? The guardians of the republic. A body of philosopher kings who have the knowledge of philosophy and of gymnastics. Remember that for Plato, physical education was very important to basically rule other people, right? It's a meritocracy, so to speak. And yes, kind of the Platonic good for everyone. And this happens a lot in books. So if we have this, we might be tempted to think, hey, Buddhism then it's kind of a Platonic idea, right? Of a just king with everyone in the middle. That's true to an extent. The thing is that it's not the only pure line. You have pure lines like, for example, Abhirati. Now, Abhirati, it's a very different pure line. Abhirati is like the opposite. It's actually the opposite in direction. Whereas Sukhavati is on the west, Abhirati is on the east. Abhirati is the Buddha land of Buddha Akshobhya, and it's kind of the polar opposite. Whenever Sukhavati is gentle rolling hills with beautiful lakes, Abhirati is like a very close jungle broken by mountains that have glaciers on the top, right? Imagine like a mixture of the Himalayas and the densest jungle, like in some places too, that is Abhirati. And whereas in Sukhavati, nobody has sex, everyone's very monk-like, there's wild orgies and cannibals and a lot of things in Abhirati. Yeah, exactly. And this is if we do not go, for example, to Sandok Parli. With Sandok Parli, it's in Madagascar, the island of Madagascar, which is the land of the Rakshasas, and it's land where Padmasambhava is currently the Buddha, that place. And if you have read anything about Padmasambhava, you basically know what it is, right? It is kind of one of the strangest things that I always have found very, very appealing for me is that one day I hope to go to Madagascar, because in Madagascar, it's not only Sandok Parli, the land of Padmasambhava, but there was in the 17th century, 16th century, 17th century, most of the pirates of the Caribbean found the Caribbean trades very difficult to do because there was more patrolling from Spain and England. They moved off to Madagascar and founded this town called Libertalia, which is essentially a very Padmasambhava kind of town too, right? With pirates and raiding and orgies and rum and everything else. So you have, on one hand, Sukhavati, which is kind of, oh, sorry. I just deleted Sukhavati after the pure line, please. Forgive me, Oitava. You have Sukhavati, oh, what? You have Sukhavati, which is the land of the monks. You have the wild land of Avirati, right? Land of the jungle and of the fighting. And you have Sandok Parley, which essentially is pirate town, right? It's like Turtle Island and the pirates of the Caribbean, right? All of these are viable pure lands, and all of these are very different in the way in which everyone gets one thing at a different moment and a different manner. So everyone is a very different political project. And this is interesting because instead of thinking of Buddhism as having like one structure politically with a wise king in the center, we must realize that this is just one of the political models that Buddhism offers. And why is that important? To kind of wrap a little bit of that. Because in this moment, we're in a moment in which the discourse in Buddhism, it is very heavily dominated by people who want to naturalize one of these models of pure ones. And surprise, surprise, it's not the pirate model. It is the heavy centralized on a philosopher king model that wants to be kind of pushed to people. Yes, Lama Fede.
What are the other possible models, Lama, of the organization and rulership of the Pure Lands?
Oh, there's a lot of them. You have, as I say, Sandok Parley, anarchistic pirating, anarchistic democratic pirating raiding, right? From the Rakshasas. You have like the survivalist hunter society of Avirati. You have the bizarre technocracy that is the Shambhala city states with a capital in Kalapa, right? You have a lot of more of a libertarian anarchy of Mamansadati, which is the land of Radhasambhava. And also these are the models of Pure Lands. But there's also another level. So, Lama Fede, here she is. Yes, someone else. Yeah. There are other levels. So here's the important thing. For example, let's look at today's Tara Pure Land. You mean like the yes, you mean in the Botala. This is part of this is a little bit Tara Pure Land. It's a little bit it's very much like Sukhavati, because the forest of turquoise leaf, which is Tara's Pure Land, it's on Botala, which is part of Sukhavati. Right? It's a little bit more pastoral, less monastic that it is the rest of Sukhavati, but it is part of Sukhavati. If you like the more wild kind of Pure Lands, the one that you're looking for is Quechara, which is the land of the Daikini, which is again a land of very anarchic. It's very anarchic, very, very free society. But what happens if you look today? Today you have a lot of Buddhist parties and Buddhist governments. The problem is that they are all naturalizing this idea of the king, the philosopher king, as a center of state. So let's talk about Buddhist politics, where people are both Buddhist and clearly political. Let's talk about, for example, Thailand. Here, the Mahasamgita of Thailand, it's always very supportive of the king. If you haven't heard about the king of Thailand, I would advise you to go to YouTube and start looking about videos of him. He's very controversial. He does not live in Thailand. He lives mostly in Germany. And he's extremely controversial because, well, you'll see. I don't want to offend anyone, but he's a bit of a bastard, right? So it's very much the fourth thing, from having elephants step on people he doesn't like, to having like 10 million lovers, to go to do drunken orgies. He's very much kind of the opposite of the Nikaya idea of the Chakravartin, right? I also support that move. That is very fun. That I must say, it's very fun. He's a very fun individual, I must say, right? He's very fun. I probably wouldn't feel as fun if I was a Thai person who's actually, if I make fun of him in Thailand, I would probably get uh, fined or in prison. So it's not as fun. But that's a very uh, Buddhist Buddhist institution, which is the big assembly of monks in Theravada in Thailand, that very much support him. And they say, this is the way the country should be ruled, by this king who decides this and this and this. Then you have, for example, the Komeito Party, right? You know, the Komeito Party is part of the Soka Gakkai, and the Soka Gakkai, they already have a project. You might agree or not agree with them, but they're a kind of conservative, pro-environment party in Japan. And they also have this idea of how society should be run, and they run in the elections, and they also have in Congress. And also you have the Dalai Lama. No, people may say, oh, but the Dalai Lama, in 2010, I think, 2011, he renounced most of the political power that he has. And yet, a couple of weeks back, he was going into a chat with someone from the BBC, explaining that immigrants should remain in their home countries because they're better climatically, right? This despite himself being an immigrant, right? And that if there's too many people of Indian descent in somewhere else than India, that would be bad. And same for Muslims and same for Thinkers. And they should stay where they are, and they should have the form of women, and they shouldn't move. Which is a little bit disappointing for someone who has, well, lived most of his life in exile, right? And he's the leader of a group of immigrants because they're not Indian, right? But as he says, only in limited number people should vote. Yes, Samajila.
Why, Lama, is he arguing in this way, and what do you make of that in terms of being sad? Because I kind of wonder if he just wishes people could have the autonomy to stay in their own country instead of having to flee.
I think that's a little bit about it. I'm not sure. You should go ask him. That's the only person who can say that is him. I think that there is a couple of things personally. One is that I think that he would really prefer that people like Tibetans would go back to Tibet. That I totally understand it. But he didn't say he didn't frame it like that. He didn't say you know, I would like that my people who want to be in Tibet could go back to Tibet, right? He said he was asked about all the people and all the world that are moving. He says, well, you're Indian, right? And you went to UK. That's not good because if not, the England is going to stop being English and is going to be Indian, right? And same for Muslim in Europe. They shouldn't be there, just in limited numbers. So he didn't frame it like this. He framed it very much like there should be a cap. My read is that he was praised by Elon Musk because of his anti-immigration policy. It's for me, it's aligning himself with that kind of discourse, right? Yes, exactly, like Europe from Europeans, something like this. He said that if in Europe there's enough people who are not Europeans, then it would stop being Europe, and that's bad.
That's
And
very
then,
disappointing, Lama.
well, watch the video, make up your mind about it. I think it's very important for us to read that. I think that in a way it's still a teaching because it teaches us that this kind of thing can happen at any moment, right? And from anywhere else. But the important thing for me is to realize that when the same people who are saying Buddhism and politics don't mix, because they think that politics shouldn't mix with Buddhism, they hear this, which is a very clear political statement. Immigrants should go back to their own countries, Europe for Europeans, right? It's a very political statement, and they filter it out. They say, that's not Europe, that's not politics, he's giving his opinion, his political opinion, right? It's not like the Dalai Lama, it's one guy in the street which you go, well, he's a very important figure. And he's aware that he's a very important figure. He's talking about who gets what, when, how. So he's talking politics. And because people have been taught to understand that Buddhism and politics are two separate things, in effect, what they're doing is they're becoming blind to the fact that this thing that the Dalai Lama does, it's a political position. It's a very clear political position, to the point that it may not be clear for Buddhists, but it certainly was for Elon Musk, who praises his political acumen, right? And says, he gets it. He gets our policy. So if you realize that he's talking policy, if you realize that all of Buddhism at some point was talking policy, and you realize that because of interdependence, there cannot be a Buddhism without some degree of policy, without some intermixing of politics in it, then we are in a better place. Instead of denying what it is, we are in a place where we can discuss what it is. And knowing that there are different manners of Buddhist policy, the different flavors of Buddhist policy, we can discuss which is the best suited for us and for the times, right? But we won't be able to do this unless we do as the Buddha himself said. What did he says in the Dhammapada? That is the spirit of Buddhism. One of the most important things of Buddhism is to see things as they are. Unless we're able to see that when the Dalai Lama goes and says, Europe for Europeans, only in limited numbers, immigration, he's talking about policy. When we go and see people like, for example, the Karmapa say, I do not want to talk anything about policy, and then he's applying for status to escape one set of allegations in another country, and people are defending him because he's the head of the institution, and that's also policy. When we see, for example, that there is so many people in Buddhism that they are supporting institutions which in the end they're being disempowered by them, unless we can see that clearly, we won't be able to change it. And what's more, will generate confusion, will generate this idea that Buddhism is this somehow pure thing that happens away from the world, right? Instead of in samsara. Remember, Buddhism is samsara. Buddhism is samsara. Because if it wasn't something else samsara, it wouldn't be helpful for you. If you are in samsara, you need something that gets you out. And in order to get you out, it must come here. If it's something that's away, far away, nirvana, and you cannot reach it, what's the use for you, for other beings, right? It is something that is here. And that is why Buddhism has politics and has always had politics, and it will continue to have politics. But it is better for us as Buddhists if we are able to discuss them, and if you were able to think which brand of it we would like to help. And that's our path, right? To change samsara. So with this, I kinda go. Oh, I did quite in time. I'm amazed by myself. Let me pat myself in the back. I did just in the time that we have allowed. Question, doubts, comments, insults. At this point, we're finishing. So if you want to insult, you're more than welcome to.
It's truly disheartening that the Dalai Lama, His Holiness, said these things, Lama.
Don't believe me. Just go and look at them. Look at them.
No, disheartening, not
Yeah.
disbelief, disheartening.
No, I know it's disheartening, but it was disheartening for me. In a way, I think that it is a teaching. I think that it's very important for us to keep that view of His Holiness, because also he's been to a lot, and he's teaching us in a way. Because if he didn't do these kind of things, there wouldn't be an argument for us to make and say, you know, Buddhism politics have always been together. If he was like this perfect evader, right, of any kind of sticky situation, it would be harder to convince people and to tell them, hey, look, he's talking politics. people were like, no, His Holiness would never talk about this. No, when Elon Musk gets it, it's harder to discuss with him. Well, I think, Brent, that sleeping could be it. Also, I would say that this time it seems a very direct, a very real and thought out situation, because he didn't like explain himself later. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He did none of the things that have been marked the other incidents, in which he says, "Hey, sorry, I gave this message. This was like probably he meant this one, right? In that sense." And it's going to be hurting or disheartening depending on what one thinks, but I think that it is what it is. It is what it is, and this is what we should try to realize, right? I don't know, and I wouldn't really worry about that. About kind of finding exactly the term. What my main thing is that he's proposing one view, but there can be others. There are other views that are also Buddhist that are possible. Yes, probably also agrees that there is a correlation between immigration and certain extreme take, but also it's probably that now, at least here in Argentina, I'm talking just by my personal experience, discourses that 10 years ago would have you banned of also every kind of public appearance. No, they are accepted again, right? Like discourses on the Argentinian spirit, or like we don't want foreigners here. Like it's world's most open, underpopulated country, and suddenly they're talking about nationalism and the Argentine soul, and it's like, what? Really, dude? Argentine soul. But yes, it kind of came back in. And yes, I know that I'm aware the UK is in the middle of this. So this is, I think, a way for him to waiting those issues. Also, it's like nobody had, if he hadn't given his opinion, nobody's going to go to the Dalai Lama and ask him, hey, what do you think about the situation, the political situation regarding immigration in the UK? What does anyone ask the Dalai Lama? Who are you, Your Holiness? What do you think is the best way we can live our life? Nobody asks him this kind of questions, right? It's like if I went to him and say, hello, Kundun, how are you? Can you tell me what do you think about Milei fiscal policies? Like, nobody's explaining this. Now, if he comes and he starts talking about Milei fiscal policies, then it's a different situation, right? So I think that, in a way, it is a sign of the times. And I think that the Dalai Lama himself wouldn't have said this 30 years ago. But that he does now means that, like everything else, is interdependent. And now that the world's going more that way, in a way of intolerance and anti-immigration, and a lot of more conservative directions, if he can move that way, this means that everyone can move in any way, right? I don't know what is Project 225, but I guess that the most important thing role is try to find. I would say that in this moment, it's a very trying moment for a lot of people. The important thing is to build communities, right? To build communities, find people to work with, and as we were discussing with Lama Jili before, right, about the Brahmin. By yourself, you won't be able to make much. Luckily, we are a community-minded system in Buddhism. That's why the Sangha is so important, right? Why the Pula is so important. So build a community and start organizing, and that'll, I think, it'll give you either a way to resist, or at least you'll have friends with whom to discuss how to do things, right? And yes, Brent, I totally agree. I mean, whichever thing we can say about him, he has been through a lot. He has been through a lot, and the Tibetan people has been through a lot. So we always should try to bear in mind that, right? But we can be loving and kind towards him, and at the same time think that this is not the only position to be, right? And I think that's the key. That's the key. And if this is, please, I want to be very clear. There is no ill will, and I think that So the Lama is absolutely great. And as I say, he's teaching us in a way, right? Because if he hadn't made these comments, probably today's talk would have been a lot more difficult to would have had less impact. Well, is there's no more question? Oh yes, then jump is all challenging, but it's a great opportunity to cultivate bodhicitta. Yes, it especially include Trump in bodhicitta. I know that it may be hard. I know that you may have fear for his return, or for people that you know may be in danger. But even so, we must never let anyone escape our field of bodhicitta. Thank you everyone for joining me tonight, and I hope you have a great weekend. If you need anything, I'll be online. Bye bye.